Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is daughter of Yisrayl, Mariah Hawkins. I would like to start serving you forever as the priest is starting very soon. Please find your seats for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is daughter Yisrayl, and I would like to serve you forever as the priest is starting very soon. It's a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl now entering the sanctuary. I would like to turn it over to the priest.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Okay, I'd like to start off with Daniel 9:24. And it says, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holiest of holy people. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem to the Messiah, the Prince, will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street will be rebuilt and the wall even in troublous times. Now, the reason why I want to start with that scripture is everybody has been paying attention to the Israeli elections. And right now they're at a stalemate. They're not sure who the leader is. They're not sure which direction they're going to go through. And they may even have to have another election in order to choose a prime minister for Israel. Now, why this is so important in this time period is we are aware that Trump has moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He has also signed in the Jerusalem Embassy Act, where there's no more waivers, and that has been established, and it was brought out, the dates that are involving that. Now, what I wanted to focus on in these last days, the same thing, there's another prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. And if I could have my first slide, please. All of these events that are taking place brought me back to my previous gematrias that I had done. And one of them was the 2017 HOY calendar, which the 10/31/2015 temple brochure was part of that. And this is why it is so important what's going on today. The peace treaty, we are aware the peace treaty was signed 9/13/1993 and went into effect 10/13/1993. Right after that, the temple patent was filed 11/22/1993 and was granted 8/1/1995. Now, this is the patent that the House of Yahweh holds for the rebuilding of the Yeketzkiah's temple in Jerusalem. Now, at the end of that year, the Vatican finalized an accord with Israel. Now, these three events have all taken place right in these last days, during the midst. Now, what else is going on? I'd like to have the next slide, please. Now, I had also done a gematria on, well, these are all Strongs, and it was definitions from the Strong's concordance. And on 11/22/1993 was the patent filing date, and 11/22 comes from 11/29, and it means to build, establish, construct, build the house of Yahweh, and that has been done in these last days. Now, also some of the other numbers, if you see that are highlighted, you see the number 17. 17 comes from 18, and we know that 17 is pastor's lot number. And that means to bring the bringing forth of fruit. We are the fruit that the overseer is bringing forth in these last days. He has been teaching us, guiding us, praying for us, crying over us. agonizing that we would come to understand, and we believe in these last days without seeing that the prophecies that the overseer is bringing forth and fine-tuning are going to be taking place in the near future, sooner than what we think. Now there's another number, it's 1074. This is one of his numbers also. It means firstborn, new fruit. It comes from it's a denomination of 1061. It means first fruits. Remember, the first will be the last will be first in these days, in these last days. First fruits. The overseer is bringing forth the first fruits to present them as holy, righteous people of new in these last days to Father Yahweh. And now I'd like to have my next slide, please. Now the next one is, again, we're going on to continue on with these numbers. Now we do know that 17 was the number of the overseer's lot number. And from the number in Scripture by E.W. Bollinger on page 245, he says 17 stands out as a prominently significant number. It is not a multiple of any number, and therefore it has no factors. But if you go on, hence it is called one of the prime or indivisible numbers. And what's more, it is the 7th in the list of prime numbers. Now this is a review. I want to bring these numbers into your remembrance so that you can continue on in realizing that this is all done by Yahweh. We have no control. The overseer has no control of what's going on. This is all done by Yahweh. Now 17, somebody said this to me. It says the 1 cent, whose number is 17, cannot be divided, indivisible, from Yahweh's laws in these last days. Now, to continue on, last time I spoke, one of the times I spoke, I said that like Eliah, Yisrayl alone is left of all the prophets of Yahweh. If I could have that one, please. Yes, all the prophets of Yahweh, but the prophets of Baal number 4,199 men. Now, in the English gematria, it came to 8304, which comes from 8280, drop the 0, 828, it's the overseer's birth date, and 3050, has been brought out time and time and time again by the deacons and the Kohans. This means Yah. Yah has prevailed. It's and 8280 is a primitive root. It means to prevail. It means power. 3050 means the sacred name of the Heavenly Father, Yahweh. Now, why is this so important in these days? The last number that I did was for the tree of Yada. If I could have that slide, please. And it was the English gematria, came 781, which, the English gematria is 894, means Babel, from 1101, which means confusion, Babylon, to mix, to mingle. Now, these headlines that I'm going to read off to you, these are the headlines that are taking place that have not really been in the news, but they are part of the news. It says that Netanyahu's main rival envisions a third temple being built following the elections. Now, this main rival says it wants to rebuild the third temple. Now, another headline, this was on 829, Netanyahu to make pro-third temple politician top official. Now, why this is so important is this pro-third temple politician has acquired 4 seats in the Knesset. You have to have 4 seats in the Knesset in order to be able to become a member of the Knesset. Netanyahu is going to take this pro-third temple politician that is part of the Knesset, and he's going to bring him in to his political standings and his coalition, and Yahweh willing, we'll see what takes place next. With that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. So, have you ever considered what a great blessing it is, like truly, what a great blessing it is to be able to be here in this time period in Yahweh's house? Praise Yahweh. And one thing that shines forth really clearly, and always has been and always will, from our great overseer, and also you can see this in Yahshua's writings, is the full trust and belief that they have in Yahweh for his plan, and not only themselves, but wanting to teach it to others, okay? And we're the group here that Yahweh has chosen for us to be taught in these last days, his plan and things that are coming to pass in a shortened time. So we're going to start off in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 9. And we all know the scripture very well about the two trees. Out of the ground Yahweh made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and desirable for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, that's the house of Yahweh, and the tree of the knowledge of evil was in the midst also, a mixture. And we know that the trees of the gods, Yahweh allowed those for a reason, right? He allowed them, and he also allowed the trees of the gods to murder Abel, who was the preacher of the tree of righteousness. And that was in Genesis chapter 4. All that took place there in that time period in the beginning, and from that time all the way till now, we're in 2019, right? We're in the last 3.5 years. All those years, sin has grown, right? It's reached to its peak. And its peak is actually kind of downhill. Its peak is the destruction, the perishing, right? And the 1 hour burden in Revelation chapter 18 and 13. Okay, so here recently our overseer has been really trying to get us to, as he said in the 6th book of Israel, speed up our hearts. Because Yeshua said in Luke 24:25, we don't want to be fools who are slow of heart. Speed up our hearts, not be unbelievers. Okay, Yeshua told us in Matthew 24, he broke down the last days for us. And in verse 29, he said the sun might be darkened if it comes to pass. Did he say that? No, he said the sun will be darkened. That means it's going to occur. Just like the temple was destroyed in 70 AY, the nuclear war, the nuclear bombs that were invented in this generation will darken the sun. In this generation, and in verse 3, he called it the end. Remember, his disciples asked him, what time period will this come to pass? And he said, in the end. In verse 7, we all know that says, nation will be against nation and religion against religion. And that's coming to pass here in the last days. You can see that they're fighting over this oil. They're divided amongst themselves. Also, the House of Yahweh and all the rest of the 4,199 religions, they're teaching against the House of Yahweh. Oh, we're the only one who's teaching Yahweh's way. In verses 33 and 34, Matthew 24, 33 through 34, Yeshua said, when you see all these things coming to pass, know that the end is near, right? And that generation will not pass away until all these things are fulfilled. So we've seen all these things come to pass. We're just waiting for the last few prophecies to be fulfilled about this nuclear bomb. So why is it that someone could not see these prophecies are true? And that Yahweh is telling the truth when he said, you know, he tells us in the Book of Yahweh what's going to occur. And then he shows it's what's occurring in real time. And then he has a seventh Malach telling us what he showed us. Remember? Why wouldn't someone believe that? That's because they're unbelieving and slow of heart. Well, what causes this? His righteousness and his wisdom is so great, he shows that he can turn this whole thing around. He has a solution to all this, and still, why would someone not believe? Well, all of us here, we can be part of this turning around. We've all chosen to be part of Yahweh's family by practicing righteousness, making it a habit every day to do the things we've been taught and to study. The study is really important because we can come here on the Sabbath and get the teachings, but the study when we're at home and on our own time is really important so we don't forget what we've learned. Because if we leave Yahweh's house, you know, when we start that process of not coming to class, not studying, eventually it leads to dying off and leaving Yahweh's house. Then you choose Satan, there will never be another opportunity for one who chooses that, right? And we don't want to be one who's given away that opportunity. Yahweh says for those, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth because they'll see what they could have had, right? In verse 11, Matthew 24 still, verses 11 through 12, Yeshua shows the 4,199 religions that are teaching iniquity, the same thing that Satan used to pull Eve. Remember lust, the pulls that she used. Eve, this is more desirable to choose evil than righteousness instead of training for Yahweh's kingdom. We have to be on guard of those things because she can do the same thing to us. So here recently our overseer encouraged us. He said Yeshua was speaking about us when he said, blessed are those who believe and not have yet seen, right? And in Revelation 21 and verse 8, we know the fearful and the unbelieving, Yahshua talked about them. Those who run off and get scared and the unbelieving who don't study, they won't have the protection, during the Passover. They'll have their part in the lake that burns with fire, which is the 1 hour burning. And we don't want to be a part of that. We want to be part of the ones that Yahshua said in Luke 24:25. Don't be fools, but speed up our heart to be part of this work. Blessed is he who believes all that the prophets have spoken, number 1. You can find that in the 6th book of Israel. And the pastor said, speed up your heart. Get your heart in this work. Slow of heart means slow of heart to be in the work of Yahweh. So the things that will help us to be not the unbelieving and fearful is to speed up our heart, to be quick to accept the work that's presented to us, and also to believe everything that is coming forth from Yahweh's house. Remember, Yahweh foretold this years in advance, and he also has given us a part to be the ones who turn this thing around. All right, with this, if y'all please stand, I'm going to turn over to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, please be seated. Yahweh's peace be with you. Shalom, great saints. Okay, I have it in my heart. If you could picture in your mind what it's going to be like to be at the marriage supper, I mean, just imagine, I don't know, like the feeling and the frequency that you're going to feel while sitting down at the table with your food before you. And even seeing Yahshua, I mean, just imagine what it would be like to see Yahshua, an overseer, and then all the righteous men of old. Like, what would it feel like to be in that moment? You know what I mean? How much joy and excitement you'd have. And the realization that you're sitting there at that table with those people. Now, just to imagine that, it also goes along with saying that it's an amazing thing what Yahweh is doing now, establishing this house through Yisrayl Hawkins. I mean, he's building a body of people, a body of the established House of Yahweh. I mean, the House of Yahweh is his people, right? So, turn over to Revelations 21, and it's so amazing that this is the greatest learning experience that we're ever going to get, because only at the House of Yahweh we provide the truth. So, Revelations 21, we're learning about the 1 hour burning, and all these things are going to come to naught. All these former things are going to pass away, and a new heavens and a new earth where righteousness dwells. And we get to follow the most amazing men on the face of the earth. Like, what are their special government? It's just so amazing, the government that Yahweh is setting up with his righteous and holy laws, the everlasting laws. And we get to follow them wherever they go for all eternity. And there will be no more pain and no more sorrow and no more nuclear wars. None of these things. No broken families. No children left. All these things are going to be gone. If I can get my hat on right. Okay. So I was thinking about these things, throughout the week. And the struggle is real right now. I mean, as we've been provided with both the king and queens of the House of Yahweh, establishing that in our mind. But it's like the things that we get to look forward to and trying to place in our minds how it would feel to be at the marriage supper. And we can look forward to that and make it real in our minds so that we can qualify ourselves to be there. Now, all 44 and verse 40, chapter 45 speaks about overseer, the one sent by Yahweh. And I was thinking in Psalm 72, it says, "Give my judgments to the king and my righteousness to the king's son." So then I was looking in Bible Hub because it has a parallel and it shows you different versions. And in the NIV, it says, "To the royal king," the royal son. So then I was like, okay, so let's put this in the Gematria. We put with royal son, And it comes out to 1074, which is amazing that the previous speaker said that 1074 are the first fruits. Given Yahweh's name is also 1074. And again, this is the tag on the last day's anointed witnesses, van. Given Yahweh's name, it's there. And I thought this was amazing as well. Sons of the Father. The sons of the Father. Even Yahweh backs this up in the tool that he's given us in the last days. It's tagged with Overseer's car tag, 1074. And another thing, I was going through the Mark of the Beast, Volume 2. He was talking about the new heavens and the new earth, and he was talking about the government that Yahweh is establishing to rule the entire universe with his perfect laws, not man-made laws, and this brings the true peace and the joy and the abundant living, no more pain, no more living with that nastiness in your heart. And he was talking about this government, right? So he says specifically, the just ones chosen to be kings. And guess what this number is? What is that, House of Yahweh? Overseer's other card tag, 322. And that 322 in the Hebrew means time to come. The West. You know, speaking of overseer who was appointed in this time period, the last house. So just remember, if you can just form a picture in your mind what it would be like with you sitting at the marriage supper, seeing overseer and Yeshua, the high priest and king, who will be crowned King of Kings and Teachers of Teachers. And with this, if you would all please stand. I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom. Let's make the peace of Yahweh be among us. Please be seated. The title of this talk is Yahweh, and that's my slide, Yahweh, a father of Abraham and Israel. And you can see once again that tag number of Pastor 322. But let's look over to that 2747. Remember that 747 is Israel Abel Hawkins, Buffalo Bill Hawkins, the number of letters in that name. And in Greek, that 747 means chief leader. Our overseer is the chief leader in these last days. And in Greek, now let's look at that full number, 2747. And it means a pen. A pen. One time it means a pen. And that should take us right to Revelation 11:1, where it says, "And there was given me a reed." Well, he says a pen, like a measuring rod. And to understand this word rod, we need to go to the 17th book of Israel. And I have a slide for that too, so you can write that down. The 17th book of Israel, 12, 16, and 11. Now, I wrote it that way because you're going to see that 16, 11 come up again. The overseer says here, surely all of you remember Revelation 11, speaking of the two witnesses, one of whom Yahweh said to Yeshua, "You will work together with this one called the branch. I will give unto him a rod." The word rod is number 4464, and it means staff of authority, a scepter. You see it? The overseer says, you see it? Yahweh said, I'm giving this to Israel Hawkins under my high priest, Yeshua Messiah. So it's given to the overseer to write with the pen and have that authority in these last days. So the next gematria is, who has come through the genes of Abraham? Remember, I've been going through the planned genealogies. And once again, it shows us who has come through the genes of Abraham. Pastor's card tag number 322. But this here gematria also shows the two witnesses, because 1924 was the year that Jacob was born. So we see the two witnesses have come through the genes of Abraham. Yes, Praise Yahweh. And not only remembering that pastor's tag number is 322, remember last time I spoke about Abraham, pastor's frequency and his signature is also 322. So here's where I got a little sidetracked. You know, my goal was to read the Planned Genealogies series. And then in the 14th book of Israel, that's where it is, there's that whole series about Abraham. But someone took me to Luke 16:11. So if you want to go to page 802, on page 802, and that's where I have the next gematria, because there's something about 16:11 I need to show you. It says this is a bread bag. The written word was brought back in English in the year 1611 for only one purpose. And I know we all know that purpose, but let's turn that bag so that they can see the purpose and clear how Yahweh really makes it clear. In 1933 was the conception of the overseer. So if you take away 1611, look at what you get. You get pastor's tag number. We needed that King James Version so that his mother, who was inspired by Yahweh, could teach him while he was still within the womb. Yahweh is truly amazing how he shows that in the numbers. So, now getting back to Luke 16:11, where I thought I was getting off track, it says, "Therefore, if you have not been faithful in unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the trust of the true riches?" Now, it's asking each of us that question. But then it took you down at the bottom of the page, it tells you to go to the sermon date 3/20/93. And if you could look at the overhead, you'll see what that title of that sermon is, because I thought I was like, I really need to stay on Abraham, but I was so joyful that Abraham is in this here one, because this is the title. Diligently obey Yahweh by doing the works of Abraham. Pay third tithe as commanded by Yeshua in Matthew 19:17-23. And when you read this sermon, and I encourage you all, it's in the second book of Israel, it's the Going On to Perfection, number 19. When you read this, you will truly, truly understand the great honor and privilege and blessing we have of paying third tithe to the poor and the needy, those without Yahweh's word, that they will soon come to the house of Yahweh. Okay, the next gematria is, we're the descendants of Abraham today. And there you'll see once again pastor's tag number 322. We are the descendants of Abraham today. You see that up there? 322. Now our great overseer shows in this sermon that being, and that's the Going On to Perfection one, that being a descendant is more than just your genes, but the choice to be faithful as Abraham and doing his works, Abraham's works, keeping all the laws. Remember, the Sadducees and Pharisees said, we are Abraham's seed. And then Yeshua said to him, if you were Abraham's seed, you would be doing the works of Abraham. And we in the house of Yahweh are Abraham's seed because we are the only one on the face of this earth that is doing the works of Abraham. So we have that blessing of paying this third tithe. I have so much more I want to share with Abraham. He's like so amazing. But I'm leaving you with this last gematria, which says, who is Yahweh's Ahib? Now, in Texas, for all who don't know, we have a grocery store called HEB. But I'm letting you know that this isn't talking about a grocery store. So Ahib, but I'll give you a clue. It sort of is like a grocery store too. So, see who the answer is, 1074. Yahweh willing, next time I speak, I'll be able to tell you what the question it really is. Let us all stand for our next great speaker, the great judge.
Please be seated. Now, I want to know what that means. The title of my speech today is The Adoption Process. And how many of you have ever adopted a pet? Show of hands? Okay, great. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could send the the dog to obedience school and they would behave exactly the way that we want them to behave before we adopted them? Show of hands. Okay. Do you know that Yahweh he's putting us through an adoption process right now? And do you know that he has put us through an obedience program right now? Right. I want you to remember that our overseer used to be a dog breeder, right? Right now, our overseer is putting together an adoption program. Yahweh has him in charge of this because, remember, Yeshua's the bridegroom, right? And our overseer is getting us ready to be adopted. I'm not saying we're dogs. We're not even pets. But what I am saying is that we have to have certain requirements in order for us to be adopted. True or false? Okay. Now, I want to read from the second book of Israel, chapter 8, verse 69. And Pastor's reading from Ephesians 1:5 here, and he says, Ephesians 1:5, preordaining us to be his children by adoption. And Pastor says this word adoption is word number 5206 in Strong's Greek, and it means placing as a son. It's a sonship in respect to Yahweh. And Pastor says it applies to you here. Then you're going to be a part of his kingdom if you will overcome, if we make it through this obedience training, right? If we overcome, if you will hold fast to this work until the end. It is not easy to stay in the work until the end. But remember, if we want to be adopted, we have to make it through the adoption process, okay? Then you will be part of this kingdom and part of the family, just like if you were born into it. Okay, so Pastor and Yeshua are officiating this adoption. They are like the lawyers. They're getting it all ready, right? Okay, Yeshua's the bridegroom, remember. All creation is groaning and waiting for this adoption to take place. We know that, right? And that word adopt, according to Webster's dictionary, it means to take by choice into a relationship, to take up and to practice. Yahweh is voluntarily bringing us to, he doesn't need us, but he wants us. Yahweh wants us. Doesn't that make you feel so special? Yahweh wants you to be a part of his family. I love this because, people can have children all day long. Having a child is not very special right now in this time period, is it? They do it all the time. They cast them off. They don't take care of them. But when a father wants you, that's very special. They're hand selecting you. They're looking at you. They're watching you. Remember, we're going through the obedience training now. And we're being selected by our behavior. That word practice from the Webster's dictionary, because remember it says to take up and to practice. That word practice means to carry out and apply, to perform often or habitually, to perform or work at repeatedly so as to become proficient, which means to be skilled. We want to be doing it. We want to be practicing it. It needs to be a part of our character, these laws. Now, what we have to do as the ones that are in the adoption process, we have to answer a question, and only we can answer it. Are we practicing righteousness, or are we acting righteous? Do you know what the difference is? Acting righteous, we have actors in Hollywood all the time, and they can play act, and when they're around people, they can act righteous, right? But one who practices righteousness, they're doing it, they're applying it, they're in the classes, they are taking this obedience training, because when Yahweh is selecting, it's not like when you go to the pound and you're like, oh, that little puppy's so cute. I think I'll take that one. Is it a boy or a girl? No. Yahweh is watching everything, and the adoption process is long. It's not a short thing, because what he does is he watches how we're going to react during this adoption process and situations, and he needs to know that we're going to get along with the siblings. Oh, yeah. You can't bring a pet into the home. Have you ever seen a pet not get along with another pet? You know, you can have a fight on your hands. But we have to be able to get along with one another. Now, I want to show you Romans 8, verses 15 to 16, because this is the determining factor of whether or not you're getting along, whether or not you're going to be adopted, whether or not you fit in. Romans 8, 15 and 16, and it says, "For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by which we cry out, Abba, Father." Yahweh's Spirit itself testifies with our spirit that we are the children of Yahweh. We are adoptable. We are adoptable, okay? The side note there, that Yahweh's Spirit testifies with our spirit, the side note, Pastor wrote how? How is this testifying going on? He wrote, because we agree with his laws, we are in unity with Yahweh. That's how we know that we are adoptable, because we agree with the law. In Ephesians 4, verses 11 through 16, it's talking about the offices in the great house of Yahweh. Verse 11, it says, "And he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some preachers of the message of the kingdom, and some pastors and teachers for the perfecting," so that we could learn to get along with each other and be adoptable. To be adoptable. And if Abel puts us in a spot, get along with the person in that spot. Now, unlike animals, we can't be territorial and this is my spot, you're in my spot, I'll bite your little finger if you come in here. No, we need to be adoptable. Adoptable. Until we all come to the same unity of the faith, we already learned that that's how we do it. We're adoptable. The same unity of the faith, no longer being tossed to and fro, right? "From whom the whole body," verse 16, "being fitly joined together by that which every joint supplies, according to the effective working in the measure of every part, causes growth to the body itself for the building or the adoption of all the family members of the great house of Yahweh." Praise Yahweh. So, I encourage us to all become adoptable. And at this time, I have the great opportunity to turn it over to the great priest in the house of Yahweh. Please stand.
Shabbat Shalom. This time we get to hear from Great Deacon Michael Ossel.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to move quickly. Turn over to Genesis 3, and that is found on page 2. We'll start in 4. "And the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die.'" Now, you won't die if you don't follow those rules. You'll live forever. "For he knows in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, Elohim, knowing righteousness and evil, evil as the gods." Let's turn over to Psalm 82. Psalm 82. Psalm 82. We'll start with verse 1. "Yahweh stands in the assembly of the gods, Elohim, and he gives judgment among the gods, Elohim. Yahweh says, 'How long will you defend the unjust?' Gods, Yada, ways of the world, and show partiality to sinners. Gods, Yada, ways of the world. You should defend the weak and the fatherless. You should have maintained the rights of the poor and oppressed, as my servant Yisrayl Hawkins does in these last days. You know nothing. You understand nothing. You walk about in darkness, and all the foundations of the earth are shaken because of you." Gods, Yada, ways of the world, Vatican, Coptic Catholic Church. "I have said, you are gods, Elohim, you sons of the Most High, Yahweh, the first sons. And like Adam, you will die. Just like all the other rulers, you will fall." And we see that beginning to take place in the world. The title of this code search is "Evil as Gods." So let's go to the codes here. Okay. And the beginning of the search was right here. And this is evil as gods. And some of the things that came up were pretty much expected, but some things were kind of shocking. You have the main one right here, which is evil as gods. And then, of course, right here we have, so I can see it, Catholic. Catholic. Then we have Christianity. And remember, the search topic is evil as gods. And you have Christianity. Right over here we have Bethel, which is house of God. Then over here, crossing Christianity, is destruction. Now, destruction crossed Christianity 3 times, but I just put it up there once, meaning it's complete. Their destruction is coming. The ways of the world will end, and Yahweh's great saints, the holy women of Nu and the holy men of Nu, will take over and lead under the authority of Yisrayl Hawkins and Yahshua Messiah, bringing peace to this world which desperately needs it. All right. I always get lost on these. Okay, so we have, again, Christianity, house of God, destruction. All right, then up here we have adversary, which is Satan the devil, which is anything or anyone that would exalt itself against Yahweh and Yahweh's house. Okay. Then we have right here, we have rabbi. Now, rabbi means teacher, but it also, from the definitions we have seen, that it means Lord. Okay, Lord. Okay, we have Lord there. Then right here, we have demon. Demon is right there. Then over here, we, malice. We have malice. We have masonry, which is the ways of the gods. Masonry. Then right here, we have Nimrod, which is Yada. Nimrod. Okay. Then we have right here, number 12, which crosses evil as gods, and that's Rome or Roman. Rome or Roman. And right here we have Mary, which crosses evil as gods. Mary. Okay. And right here we have Yada. Of course, that came up, which was expected. Yada. Down here we have 666. Then right here we have CPS, or CMS for those of you who remember the sermons. CMS, CPS. Okay. Then right here we have abomination. Abomination. We have, right here, we have the word damned. And they are doomed for what is going to be brought about upon them. They have destruction coming. They're damned in their curses. Okay? And over here we have universal, of course. Universal came up. We have Cain, or the way of Cain. Then over here, which crosses Rome or Roman, is war. And over here, and this crossed Christianity 3 times also. Lord, right there. And finally, we have warfare. And we see what's coming. So, being evil as the gods will always end in warfare and destruction. Other words that were found were Coptic, Egypt, abhorrence, adultery, annihilation, sorcery, viciousness, God, and ugly. Now, ugly crossed Catholic, Rabbi, and Roman 3 times. Okay, so ugly came up. And this one came up, made by computer. Well, we know from the Mark of the Beast book, computer is 666. But we also know that the computer is also used by the holy men and women of Nu to do the work of Yahweh in a righteous manner. So it is a needed tool, and when used according to the teachings of Yahweh's house, it is a right tool, and it works. Okay? So we're going to close out with a scripture. If you'll turn to Deuteronomy 27 and verse 26. You gods of the Most High, evil as gods, the way of the world, the way of the Catholic Church, universal. Cursed is the one who does not uphold every word of this law by carrying out the words coming from the house of Yahweh, the teachings of Yahweh's house, the law and the prophets. Cursed is the one who does not uphold every word of this law, of these teachings, by carrying it out. Then all the people shall say, so be it. With great joy, I have the privilege to turn it over to a great priest in Yahweh's house, the great Kohan Benjamin Krause Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Yahweh's peace be with you all. Please be seated. Okay, so getting right into it. Now, this past first day, I looked up this Sabbath date, and I looked it up in Gematria, and I was pretty astounded at what I saw. And I was working on something else, and I got a call from Pastor just maybe 3 hours later, and he says, look, I'm working on this naming this city, and he says, Abel's not working. You know, Abel already has his own city, does he not? Okay? And he says, can you look up City of Israel for me? And that's how it got started. I almost fell out of my chair. Okay? And you're going to see why right now. You'll see here in a second why. I almost pulled an Eli. Okay. Can I have my first slide? Because today's a very special day. Because you're sitting right now in the future city of Israel. Now, why did Yahweh choose today to bring this forward? Well, let's see. Let's have the first slide. Today's date is Isaac 21, 9/21. So we have dual 21s on the Roman calendar and Yahweh's sacred calendar. You'll notice the middle number even shows it. 21 double is 42, right? Now let's look at these meanings here of Isaac 21, 9/21. The first number means 357 is leading man, noble, mighty. You put that in Gematria, and look whose number comes up. Look whose birth date comes up. 8/28. 2142, the second number, means a memorial named to mark so as to be recognized, record. From 2145, remembered man. Man. And the third number is 3478. Now, let's pronounce this right. Yisrayl. Can you say Yisrayl? Not Israel. Yisrayl. In fact, that's the way it should have been translated in every scripture in your Holy Bible, in the Book of Yahweh. Yisrayl. It's 3478. Okay? And it means Yisrayl, and it's from, by the way, 8280. 8280. Now, 828, is that not his birth date? Again? Now, so you can see how special this day is, right? Yisrael's written all over this day. Now, when you add those up, you get 5977, and it means a spot as being fixed. In other words, a spot, a piece of land, as being established. A place. From 5975, to change, appoint, erect, raise, establish, establishing, fixed. Okay, can I have my next slide? Now remember, back on 5/18 of this year, I gave a sermon called a time to Build Up. And this is some of the numbers. This was from Ecclesiastes 3:1-3, that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to break down and a time to build up. And remember, the 1122 was an important number there because that was the date that the temple patent was granted in 1993, the House of Yahweh temple patent here in America. Okay? And let's look at these numbers again. 187 and a time to build up means fully ripe, reach maturity, flourish from 188 at the present point of time. The second number, 1122, now pay close attention here. It means builder of a family name. From 1129 to build, set, establish, build up Yisrayl. Build up Israel is what it says. I put the Y in there because that's what it should say. Build up Yisrayl. Now the next Strong's Greek 1122 means a man learned in the law of Moshe, a teacher, a writer, a recorder. From 1121, writings, literature, bill. Bill. Y'all know a Bill, don't you? Bill Hawkins? Buffalo Bill Hawkins? We all know who he is, right? Okay, and it's from 1125, and it means to record, to describe, write. The third number, 835, means to guide, be level, honest, right, straight, blessed. It's the word Ishar, which the word Yeshurun comes from. So there's no doubt about who this is talking about, right? Now, this Ecclesiastes 3 was written in 977 BY. So when you add 977 BY to 2019, when the establishment of the city of Israel takes place, you get 2996. And notice it means he causes to build. From 1129, which we just read, to build, set, establish, build up Israel. Build up Yisrael. All right, so Pastor said, did you look up City of Israel? Well, I looked it up. Here we go. Can I have my next slide? City of Israel. You see the same number there, right? 1122. We get the same meanings in 187 about reaching maturity at the present point of time. 1122, the builder of the family name, to set up and establish, to build up Yisrael. And then we get the 1122 in the Greek. Remember, a man learned in the law of Moshe. Don't we know a man learned in the law of Moshe? A writer, a recorder. Is he not a recorder and a writer? Man, the man's he's hunched over from writing all day. Okay? That's all the man does. And remember that name, Bill. Don't forget Bill. Okay, in 1122 in the Greek. The third number, 1568, means witness pile. A memorial of stones. Okay, a memorial of stones. And that goes back to 2142 in that first gematria about this memorial. And remember when Yeshua ben Nun crossed the Yarden River, remember he took the 12 stones and he set them up as a memorial? The 12 stones, 1074. And remember, whenever you see 179, that's Abel. That's Abel too. Okay, and that's Pastor's tag number in these last days issued to him in 2016. Can I have my next slide? Now, the name Yisrael first appears in Genesis 32:28 on page 28, which is one of Pastor's lot numbers, right? Okay, 28. This is the first time you'll see it. When Jacob was named Yisrael, that was in 1739 BY. I pasted it there for you to see from the Book of Yahweh with the numbers. When you add 1739 to 1991, when this sanctuary right here in the city of Yisrael was put here, you have 3730 years. Notice, 3730 means capital. 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 The definition of capital from the dictionary, the most important city or town of a country or region, its seat of government, and administrative center. I put that in gematria, and look what I got. 1122 again. The builder of the family name, to establish, to build up Yisrael, a man learned in the law of Moshe. The only man on the face of the earth learned in the law of Moshe. There is no other, okay? A teacher, a one sent teacher. And he writes, he gives us literature, and his name is Bill. Bill, Abel, right? Sermons were given about that word Bill and how it's Abel, okay? All right, now let's look at a couple of these other numbers on that. Go to the next slide. That number 6732 means to bloom, to blossom, to flourish, to show self. Notice the numbers you get from bloom, blossom, flourish, show self. 357, leading man, noble, mighty. Remember that was the 828, Yisrayl. Strong's 2142 again. 21, today's the 21st. Double, 2142, get it? This is why today, memorial is being made today. Yahweh had this set up from the very beginning, before this world was created. And notice 2071 means bestowed, given, bestowed upon, to endow with. That means to give somebody something. A city, for instance. 2071 in Greek means should be, shall come to pass, to be or exist. And notice when you put in to be or to exist, you get 1122 again. Remember that builder of Israel, that teacher, Bill. And notice 6800 in this gematria for the most important city or town is modest, lowly, and humble. Put that in gematria and look whose birthday comes up. The most modest, most lowly, and humble man on the face of the earth. 1934, birth date of the witness Yisrayl. So then I got a little interested here, and I put in city of refuge, city of Yisrayl. Yisrayl. Can I have my next slide? Here's what we got. 327, royal. 2439, to make haste and hurry, to be eager with excitement, ready. 2439 in the Greek means, now get this, to clothe, to provide clothing for. From 2440, cloak, robe, clothing, apparel, garments, robes. Robes. Isn't somebody making haste right now to get those done right now? Notice, it's a city of the last day's witness, 322. Okay? And 2622 in that gematria means from the west. The chief, the principal, shepherd, pastor. That's what 322 means. 2622 means refuge, shelter, to seek refuge, to make a refuge, to flee for protection. Flee where? To the city of Yisrayl. That's where you need to flee because that's what this is going to be named. Okay? Throughout all eternity right here. Abel has a city. That's not going to be taken from him. But Yisrayl needs one too. Can I have my next slide? This is from the 8th book of Israel, part 2. This is a quote from Pastor. He says, just thinking of going to each city, having a warning taking place in each city of Israel at that time, the 12 tribes which were broken up into cities. Almost if a person was a religious leader, he would go out, he would start a city, and it would be named after that person because people would be coming to him and wanting to stay around this religious leader. Now that's the way the house of Yahweh was too. The prophets, each prophet, wherever he lived, there was a city, and normally it would be named after him. Right? Now, who's teaching us in this city? His name is Yisrayl, right? So I put that in gematria. And look what comes up. 5412, temple servants. Meaning from 5414, to give, to appoint, to apportion. You know, apportioning land, assigning land. Assigned, certainly give, dedicated, designated, established, gift. Remember we saw that it was granted to him, that it was bestowed to him. Hand over, wholly give over, marry off. Remember that marriage supper we heard about? And work, work, work. From 5432, now 5412 in Greek means to bring forth and to make publicly known, and we're making it publicly known right now, right? This is where it begins, today, on the day of Yisrayl. Strong's 3247 means foundation, to lay a foundation, establish, fix, begin, to be founded, appoint, set, and sure. The third number, 4886 in Hebrew, means oil, anoint, anointed, consecrate. You don't remember Jacob? how it says he anointed the stone. Remember, he woke up, he had that stone pillow I showed you last time I spoke? Okay, never mind. It wasn't a pillow, okay? He was sleeping in the house of Yahweh. He didn't realize he was there. Do you realize where you're at? Okay? You should see by now. Now, 4886 means that which binds together, bond of unity. And remember, we must be in unity to be part of the city of Israel, because guess what? You're all going to be administrators of the city of Yisrael, sons and daughters both. You're going to be administrating the great city of Yisrael. Don't forget that. Go to my next slide. Let's break this down. City of Yisrael. Can I have my next slide? There you go. That looks pretty beautiful, doesn't it? City of Yisrael. So let's look at the word city. First number 57 is Abel. Abel. 57. Abel. Second number 342 is alluding to page 342 in this Book of Yahweh that talks about the establishment of the House of Yahweh by King Solomon and King Solomon. And then 512, we all know that's the date that pastors dream where Yahweh said, I'm in full control. Don't worry, I'm in full control. Now notice the word of. Of is 21. What's the date today? It's the 21st on both calendars, right? And 21 is really 777, okay? And today, the city designated, notice that? City designated 777. Wow, what a coincidence. And then that third number, 56, means Abel again. So whenever you see city of, Abel's all over in there. It's encoded in it, okay? Abel's there. So Yisrael, Abel, okay? But the name of the city is going to be called City of Yisrael. Can I have my next slide? Now let's look at Yisrael. We saw city of, let's look at Yisrael. Yisrael, the first number, 109, means to grieve. Remember, to mourn. Abel, mourning. 654 in the Hebrew means judge, to intercede and pray and make supplication. Is that not what this man does day and night? 654 in the Greek means to turn back, to bring again, to restore. Yes, Israel is going to bring back, and he has restored the way of Yahweh, the true worship of Yahweh in these last days. Now notice this. Strong's Hebrew 1000 is from 948, and it means linen. Fine linen, fine white linen. Not white as in a color, but bright and wise. The ones that will be wearing it, okay? And notice, it means when you put in a turn to Yahweh, you get 179, which is Abel. You get 1074, which is first fruits, and also family, generation, and age in the Greek. And then that third number, 1893, means Abel. It means Abel. Remember, he's one turning the world back to Yahweh. He's going to do it with us in his administration, right? You want to be part of that administration, right? That's why we're here, right? All right, let's go to the next slide if that doesn't convince you. Now, this should really shock you, because I've never done this before in the history of me doing gematria. I've never done this, but I'm glad I did, because Yahweh was totally inspired. Are we on the next slide? Okay. Remember the gematria I showed, a city of the last witness? And it was 322? I took the definitions and I just pasted it exactly the way I put it. I did not finagle this at all. I promise you, Yahweh's my witness. I just pasted the definition with everything. Notice, Strong's 322 from 268. I put it all in there. Notice what comes up. It's 1883, which means green, from 1876 to sprout, bring forth, and spring. Then you get 1129. See that? Again. Which means to build, set, establish, build up Yisrael. And notice the third number, 948. You drop the last number on there. That's what you do. You just drop it. It means fine linen. We just saw it on the last slide, right? In Israel. Fine linen, white linen. Fine white linen. Next slide. Okay. So then I took the definitions of the gematria of and a time to build up, and I put them in again. I did not change anything. You can go back and study this yourself. Notice this. The first number, 34 or 3843, means to be white. To be white, which means to be bright and wise. Remember, Pastor told us this last time he spoke. It means to be bright and wise. Don't look at your robes and go, hey, this isn't white. What's going on? Some kind of mistake here? No. They're purple robes. They're purple garments. But the white is referring to the brightness and the wisdom that comes from teaching Yahweh's laws and becoming a teacher. Is that not what we're here for? That's what that banner says. Learn what to teach so you can teach what you've learned, right? So it means to make white, to become white, to purify, to show whiteness, to be purified. Now get this. It's from 3835, and notice 3835. Look at the theological word book of the Old Testament number it goes to. It goes to 1074. 1074. 1074. And Pastor gave a sermon about it as well. Okay, 1074, the tag of the witness. How much plainer can it get? That's the word white used in Daniel where he says, many will be purified, made white, tried and tested. And he says, none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. You understanding, House of Yahweh? You see the city of Israel being established? Okay, so the next number, 2358, means white. Again, white. From 2357, to be or grow white. And then the third number, 2133, is olive tree. From 2122, countenance, brightness, splendor. What a coincidence, right, that all these words are being used here? In this time that these garments are being made for us to wear at this don't you see the significance of this great feast coming up? Okay, next slide. So I put city of and all the definitions that were on that one page before I showed Israel, right? And notice what comes up. 1122, the very number in a time to build up and city of Israel. 1122, which means builder of the family name, to build, set, establish, build up Yisrayl with a Y. Y, don't hide Yahweh. And remember, a man learned in the law of Moshe, a teacher, a writer, to record, describe, and write. Bill. Now notice the second number, 978. From 977. Remember, that was the year that Ecclesiastes 3:1-3 was written. And it means acceptable, to choose, to appoint, excellent, join. Are you wanting to join this administration? Then be in unity with Yisrayl in the city of Israel here. Now, for my final slide, I'm going to set you up for next time. Remember that, Ecclesiastes says there's a time for everything, right? You see that number there? That was seen just a few days ago. I'm not going to tell you anymore. I'm just going to whet your appetite. You see that number up there? Don't think that these signs aren't still being sent, because it's time that Yisrael be lifted up, this city of Yisrael that's established on this date today, right here at this house. Be ready for what's coming, because this is going to be the greatest feast you have ever experienced. I promise. Remember, the seventh moon, seventh moon, seventh work. Okay, remember these things. Keep them in your mind. It's going to blow you away once you see everything that Yahweh's bringing forth. So, city of Israel, if you'd all please stand. It's my great privilege and honor to present one of the administrators in the city of Israel, the great Kohan Ilya Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Now, going into this, remember, this city that the great Kohan's talking about, we're going to show the first video. Yeshua said there'd be earthquakes in place after place. But there's scientific study proving that this area is the least likely place on the face of this earth to have an earthquake. Why? Because it's the protected place. But pay attention to this, because you're going to see the magnitude of the earthquakes. It's mind-blowing to see how many encompass the earth in just a few years. And then the South China Sea. It's a video. It's important that everybody understands what's taking place in the South China Sea and how it ties into Revelations chapter 6 and verses 6 through 8. It's in that fourth part of the earth, and it's also about the oil and the wine, these trade routes that are being opened, and this oil that has yet to hit the market. It hasn't even been brought to the surface to sell yet, but it shows how these islands in the South China Sea, the UN many years ago set a rule that every country literally owns 200 miles off their coastline. Well, China doesn't have access to that oil in the South China Sea by that rule. But if they build some islands in the South China Sea and say that's part of their country, now their country encompasses all of the oil. But then you have the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan. They say that's their oil. And this is an oil that's not yet tapped into, that everybody's wanting, but it's a vine for oil. Don't think it's about trading just wheat or shipments of, little trinkets going across the Pacific Ocean. It's about oil, the most traded commodity on the market, oil. And with all this taking place, of course, Saudi Arabia attacked this last week, and I'm not here to insinuate who did it, but there's some countries that benefit greatly from this attack, and Iran is not one of them. But this attack, of course, it took out 5% of the Saudi oil. But if you look at it from a business perspective, they lost 5% of their oil, but it keeps pressure on Iran. More sanctions have been put on Iran this week, and you start wondering, how many sanctions can you put on a country? Well, remember, this is the pressure to sanction them. You can't buy, sell, nor trade on this market. And we'll get into what this market means here in a second, but you can't buy, sell, nor trade on this market unless you comply with what we say. Well, they have a lot of oil that can't be sold on the market, and that keeps the price of oil up. And with Saudi Arabia losing 5% of a vast amount of oil, which doesn't amount to much for them, it keeps Iranian oil off the market. It also raises the price of oil, and you have the largest producer of oil being the United States of America right now. They surpassed Saudi Arabia just a few months ago. So American oil, remember what they said when we showed about the oil in West Texas? Well, it can't be an oil boom. Prices of oil aren't high enough. But if we can get them up higher, it'll be an oil boom. Imagine having a product, and just because a missile strikes oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, now you're making more money on your product here. It's pretty easy to see what's going on in this pressure that's going forth. And of course, Iran suffering these sanctions, being accused of it. And then you have Russia and India. There's two words I want you to write down. Some of you may know what they mean. If you've ever taken economics, you'll recognize these words. One of them is fungible, F-U-N-G-I-B-L-E, fungible, and the other one is liquidity. Now, when you think about what Russia and India and China is also looking to do, they're looking to ditch the U.S. dollar. And the reason being, fungible means that you can exchange something of equal value. For example, you can have a $20 bill, and I can give you 2 tens for it. And we've exchanged it, and we both have the equal value, or 4 5s for a 20. It's of equal value. But everything that is fungible does not mean it has liquidity, which means liquidity means it's easy to get rid of. For example, you can go to Walmart with a little bag of gold that's worth $20 and try to pay your bill, and they won't take it. It doesn't have liquidity. You can go there with foreign money. They don't want to take it. It doesn't have liquidity. The item that has the most liquidity in the world is the American dollar. It's the easiest thing to trade on the market. But just because it has liquidity and it's fungible does not mean it's fair trade. For example, if somebody from Nigeria, we have a lot of people watching in Nigeria right now, if they wanted to get 10 US dollars, they would need to trade me 3,550 of their naira to get 1 US dollar, or 10 US dollars. So just because it's a trade, it doesn't mean it's equal. Russia and India, think of countries that they're looking at going to war with the United States. How would you like to be a country that has to achieve US dollars, buy your stuff on the market with US dollars, and pay the country that you're going to war with? Because you have to operate on the dollar. Well, they're trying to get out of this, even with oil, because oil is the most traded commodity on the market. And you're going to hear these words, and it's important to understand when they say commodities, oil is the most traded commodity. That's what you're hearing. Commodities can be many things, but oil is number one. So listen to this, because they're talking about India and Russia, how they're going to trade commodities on the open market, not using the US dollar. They're trying to get around sanctions, and they're trying to do things of equal value, because neither one of their dollars represent as much as an American dollar. They pay more for the same product you would use, costs them more money. Imagine something for $10 in the United States would cost a Nigerian $3,550. And just so you knew, the average salary for a Nigerian is $12.50 a week, US dollars. So it's not a fair trade, but this is the pressure these countries are put under because of the US dollar and this trade system. It's not a fair trade system at all, but when you're in the United States, you don't see how unfair it is because you're used to using the most liquidity item on the market, which is the dollar. Now, with all these things taking place, you have the Pentagon sending troops over to Saudi Arabia, trying to get ahead of Russia, who told Saudi Arabia, we noticed your missile defense system didn't work very well. We just sold Turkey one, and we can get you one too. Well, that causes the United States to go into action because once again, it's all about oil, and it's all about building these friendships, these false friendships that are taking place. And then last but not least, we have India and Pakistan. And remember, these are two nuclear countries, and they join at Kashmir, and there's always heated contest at Kashmir. Well, the Pakistani president in the last week has made the comment that they are going to nuke India if somebody doesn't get involved, they're going to go ahead and nuke India. And his threat to the world was, you need to know if we nuke them, it's going to affect the entire world. So listen very carefully to what they say, and you know one thing for sure. Years ago, we read about prophecies that were going to take place. Now we actually watch them take place before our very eyes. At this time, if we could please play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, drone strikes on Saudi oil field kind of put a little hurting on them, and of course, the scare of how that's going to affect the oil markets internationally. Some places are talking about eliminating the U.S. dollar in trade and the threat of nuclear war, but not with the U.S., not China or Russia. Not the usual suspects, but countries that do have the nuclear weapons. First, we're going to take a look at a few short videos. The first one showing a visual representation of earthquakes globally from 2001 to 2015. Take a look.
Certainly see how they have increased quite a bit there over the past 15 years, even with the little with the demonstration they showed. But very interesting how so many of the quakes are on certain fault lines, and that is what we've mentioned before, like California sitting on that fault line, which people are very worried about, a very big earthquake taking place there, and you know, California suffering some severe you know, destruction there. But interesting how those earthquakes have really increased over the past few years.
And not only in frequency, but also intensity as well.
That's right. Well, next take a look at how China has been building up islands in the South China Sea to sustain its hold onto its control of the disputed territory. Take a look at this video.
This is Fiery Cross Island. It's a little more than 1 square mile in size, and it's home to a Chinese military base. There's a 10,000-foot airstrip, an advanced radar station, a missile defense system, and about 200 troops. But the strangest thing about Fiery Cross Island is that 2 years ago, it didn't exist. And neither did the 6 other Chinese military bases that have been built on man-made islands in the South China Sea. If you look at this satellite image from 2014, you can see huge Chinese ships collecting around remote reefs in the Spratly Islands, an archipelago in the South China Sea. In this image, these ships are rapidly pumping sand and rock up onto the reef. They're building islands. And less than a year later, the Chinese had seaports, air bases, and buildings on their new island, and the world had taken notice.
We continue our look this morning at what China does not want you to see. The superpower is reclaiming land in 7 spots in the South China Sea,
adding on average more than 3.5 acres every day.
See, with these islands, China's trying to lay claim to one of the most important areas of ocean in the world, the South China Sea. The South China Sea is incredibly rich in natural resources. 11 billion barrels of oil, 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and 10% of the world's fisheries. Most importantly, though, 30% of the world's shipping trade flows through here, to the booming population centers and economic markets of Southeast Asia. It's an extremely important body of water, and right now 5 countries lay claim to some part of it. Now, most countries base their claim off the UN Law of the Seas, which says a country's territorial waters extend 200 miles off their shore, an area called the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Countries have exclusive rights to all the resources and trade in their EEZ. It's their sovereign territory. So, for example, any oil that's found within 200 miles off the coast of Vietnam belongs exclusively to Vietnam. But any area that isn't in an EEZ is regarded as international waters, and it falls under UN maritime law, which means everybody shares it. Now, every country in the South China Sea region uses this 200-mile EEZ threshold to determine its claims. All except China. China argues they have a historical claim to the South China Sea, dating back to naval expeditions in the 15th century. And they mark it using a really confusing border called the 9-dash line. Following World War II, Japan, who had dominated the entire region, lost all control of its surrounding seas. China used the moment to claim the South China Sea by drawing this imprecise line on the map that encompassed 90% of the South China Sea. It became known as the 9-dash line. And when the UN established the 200-mile EEZ in 1973, China stuck to its own line, refusing to clarify its boundaries and ignoring claims by other countries. Now that brings us to the Spratly Islands. It's a remote, barely inhabited cluster of islands currently claimed by China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. The Spratlys are both geographically and symbolically at the heart of the South China Sea. That's because any country that can claim the Spratly Islands can extend their EEZs to include them and gain exclusive rights to the surrounding territory. But it's really hard to legitimately claim uninhabited piles of sand, so a few nations have built small buildings and ports on their claimed islands, and even stuck a few people there. But China believes all of the Spratly Islands belong to them, which brings us back to why they're building islands there. Installing military bases on these new artificial islands took the dispute to a whole new level, showing how China is potentially willing to defend its claims with force. China's building these islands in order to increase control around the surrounding waters, using a strategy that they've deemed the cabbage strategy, where they surround a contested island with as many ships as possible. In May of 2013, China sent several ships to Ayungin Shoal, which is just 105 nautical miles off the coast of the Philippines, well within that 200-mile EEZ. The Philippines has 8 soldiers stationed there. Like wrapping leaves around a cabbage, the Chinese sealed off the Philippines' access to Ayungin Shoal with fishing boats, surveillance ships, and Navy destroyers, creating a blockade so that the Filipinos can't receive shipments of food and supplies. By building their own man-made islands, China is essentially building naval bases. The more islands they have, the more ships they can support, and the more territory they can slowly take control of. And the Chinese cautiously use the cabbage strategy in the Spratly Islands, taking over contested territory, but in small steps, avoiding the possibility of igniting a bigger conflict. But the disputes are intensifying. Countries are now actively arresting trespassers in waters that they claim. And China could go a step further. Since 2015, they've threatened to declare an air identification zone above the South China Sea. declaring that all aircraft that fly through it would need Chinese permission. Now, publicly, China insists that their intentions are not militaristic, but their actions say otherwise, and it's heightening tensions in the region. Steve Bannon is almost certain that the U.S. will go to war in the South China Sea.
We're going to war in the South China Sea. I was a sailor there, a naval officer. We're going to war in the South China Sea in 5 to 10 years, aren't we? There's no doubt about it.
Up until now, the U.S. has managed the situation by continuing to patrol through the South China Sea. It's also likely that the U.S. would fly fighter jets above the sea if China actually does declare an air identification zone. These are symbolic but effective ways of keeping China in check, while not getting too involved in the details of the conflict. So far, the disputes in the South China Sea have not become violent. But countries are starting to defend their claims by increasing troop numbers, weaponizing their territory, and provoking each other.
Well, I know that we brought out before that the international waters start 200 miles off of a country's coast. And with China, the farther they can get those islands out there, of course, the farther their territory expands. And as we've mentioned before in previous news reports, that area is rich in mineral resources, oil being one of them, which is, of course, part of the reason why some say the U.S. is becoming more involved in the South China Sea as a way to help other countries as well, so that they can kind of tap into something that China, as of yet, has not tapped into.
Right, and really nobody's tapped into it as of yet, but a lot of ingenuity there with the Chinese in how they built actually those islands and now have structures, air bases. I mean, you know, it's not just piling up a little sand. They've made them to where they could house huge structures and function just fine. So very interesting there in the South China Sea.
Well, the recent drone attacks on Saudi oil fields have put fearful speculation in the oil markets that this attack could disrupt the global oil supply of crude. The attack knocked out over 5.7 million barrels of Saudi oil. Saudi Arabia provides about 10% of the world's oil, and the U.S. prices rose as a result over 9%, as well as international benchmark prices, which rose over 10%. Now, those 5.7 million barrels that were taken off the market represents about half of the Saudi Arabian export, the most of which goes to Asian markets, that being China, Japan, India, South Korea, as the top markets, as well as some of that oil going to the U.S., of course, being last.
Although there have been many other attacks on oil fields in the past, this latest one tops them all in relation to maximum daily loss. Now, the next closest being the Iranian Revolution, which resulted in the loss of 5.6 million barrels a day supply. Now, the Saudis have pledged that their stockpiles, which is about 27 days worth, would keep the oil market supplied. Now, those supplies are not only kept in Saudi Arabia, but also in Egypt, Japan, and the Netherlands.
President Trump said in a tweet that the U.S. doesn't need Middle Eastern oil and credits himself with making the U.S. as the #1 energy producer in the world. Well, back in 2012, the U.S. produced over 14 million barrels of oil per day, with Saudi Arabia being next with 11 million barrels of oil per day, and followed by Russia, the three of those countries which make up over 40% of the world's oil produced. Now, the reason we're not seeing major increases in oil prices in the U.S. Is because much of the oil that we receive comes from the United States. We produce so much oil that it's not really affecting us. But the market might be affected elsewhere internationally until the facility can get back on track, which some could say could take weeks, it could take months, but nobody really knows as of yet.
Well, Saudi Arabia needs their oil prices to be at $85 a barrel for them to be able to budget their economy. So if oil prices increase, that's not a bad thing for Saudi Arabia. Now, with Venezuela and Iran's oil not on the market, that leaves Saudi Arabia to pick up the slack, which means they benefit from price increases.
More sanctions are being levied against Iran, as well as U.S. military leaders who are meeting with President Trump with the wide range of military options to decide on how the U.S. should respond to the attacks on the Saudi Arabian oil fields. That response will be based on what the U.S. and the Saudi government can prove in linking the attacks as directly coming from Iran. President Trump has warned that military action against Iran could escalate into all-out war, something President Trump has said in the past that he does not want.
Well, it seems U.S. and Saudi fingers are pointed at Iran for the recent drone and missile attacks, but Iran is firing back, insisting that they are laying the blame on Tehran because it would be too embarrassing to admit the alternative. That alternative is that some rebel Houthi fighters from Yemen could have carried out a military strike of this magnitude, which resulted in so much damage.
But the Saudis say the technology used in the attacks, direction of incoming missiles and drones, as well as the recovered debris, all lead back to Iran. Due to the deployment of U.S. troops to the region, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif warned that if the Aramco incident is used as an excuse to attack his country, Iran will have to defend itself. He also cautioned President Donald Trump not to listen to the Saudi allies, which would march him straight into war with Iran.
Well, the rhetoric between the U.S. and Iran has clearly heated up and shows how far they have come away from the negotiating table. Now, realistically, though, Iran hasn't taken a new position with this recent attack. Their policy has always been a promise to destroy American assets and allies in the region if the need arises. And that is exactly what experts say is keeping Iran's enemies at bay.
What has changed? Well, is the frequency and assertiveness with which the message is coming forth from Iranian leaders, which could be a sign that Tehran is truly concerned with the U.S., that the U.S. is planning to carry out some kind of aggression in the near future. The rhetoric coming from the U.S. is as outspoken as ever. On a visit to Saudi Arabia, the United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo described the oil facility attacks on Aramco as an act of war.
Well, as a result, Pompeo promised, quote, "There will be more sanctions. We have set about a course of action to deny Iran the capacity and the wealth to prevent them from conducting their terror campaigns. And as you can see from the events of last week, there's still more work to do," he said. "We're going to continue to drive toward that end. You cannot fail to see the failed policy of giving money to this regime by what happened in Saudi Arabia."
Meanwhile, Iran's government continues to remind the world that it was Yemen's Houthi fighters who claimed responsibility for the attacks last week on Saudi's oil infrastructure. And the Houthis themselves might consider these most recent attacks, if carried out by Iran, as retaliation for an ongoing Saudi war that was sparked by a Saudi-led invasion.
Well, we now turn to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has the latest on a bilateral agreement between Russia and India. As we've mentioned in the past, how countries are looking to drop the dollar and start trading in different currency. Now, President Putin and the president there of India got together, had a meeting, and discussed their plans to dump the dollar and start trading in a different currency. Larry, what are the details? What took place here in this meeting?
Despite U.S. efforts to stop it, the push is still on to dump the dollar and establish an alternative global system for buying and selling. The two latest countries to make inroads in that regard are Russia and India. The two nations, who are also BRICS members, met at the Eastern Economic Forum recently, where both parties expressed an interest in developing bilateral trade through the use of their own currencies. Commerce between India and Russia is reported to have increased by 17% last year and is projected by some estimates to triple by the year 2025. Analyst Christy A. pinpoints the exchange between the two nuclear powers to be, on the one hand, Russia, who sees a strengthened relationship with India as a potential instrument for opening up and developing new trade in the Northern Sea Route, and on the other hand, India, who is looking to secure more energy and take advantage of low oil prices. The proposed ruble trade cooperation between Moscow and New Delhi, which is reported to have been initiated by the two last year, has become even more valuable as the value of the U.S. dollar drops and the worth of the ruble increases. The petrodollar is still the world's most valuable reserve currency at present, however, with all of the privileges of liquidity and easy access to capital that affords. But due to the aggressive economic policies of the current administration, many nations are beginning to see the U.S. dollar as a weapon of extortion and oppression. That is reportedly producing fear, and that fear is leading to insecurity and a preference for protectionist policies borne by an increasing distrust among the nations. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Yeah, well, you can see a lot of countries are looking to do that very thing, move away from the U.S. dollar. In fact, the BRICS currency system was something that was started some years ago in an attempt to do that very thing. But the only thing is the economy, the world's economy is so much dependent on the U.S. dollar. It's kind of a difficult move for countries to make and still have a lucrative economy.
Right. But it seems like in years past that countries were afraid to get rid of the dollar.
Right.
But now more and more you hear of the countries talking about it and finding ways that they can still make it work, even though, as you said, the dollar was played such a huge role in their economy. Now they're looking, the countries are getting together, as we just saw there, to find a way to shift away from that dollar and trade in something different.
That's right. Well, as we mentioned earlier, the U.S. is making plans to deploy troops to Saudi Arabia. Following a National Security Council meeting, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper held a news conference at the Pentagon to announce it. Esper said the president has approved the deployment of U.S. Defense forces, which will be defensive in nature and primarily focused on air and missile defense.
Well, he added, we will also work to accelerate the delivery of military equipment to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, to enhance their ability to defend themselves.
Well, while it's not clear how many troops the U.S. will send, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, did emphasize the defensive nature of the deployment, saying, we're contributing to Saudi Arabia's defense. We would be looking, as the Secretary of Defense said, for other international partners to also contribute to Saudi Arabia's defense.
Well, the Secretary of Defense ignored Iran's denial of any involvement in the attacks on the Saudi oil installations, but instead insisted Iran was totally responsible. Now, however, he did confirm the U.S. forensic team was still working with Saudi experts who have not concluded their investigation as yet.
Well, the announcement to deploy troops to the Middle East came quickly after President Trump made his decision to impose new sanctions on Iran. So it looks like the U.S. is going to sandwich economic pressure between a military show of force, but call it defensive support.
Well, the leader of Pakistan has once again threatened a possible nuclear war with India, which could affect the entire globe. Now, in a speech to his citizens, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has committed a historic blunder on Kashmir. Now, this came just hours after Prime Minister Modi had a sidebar meeting with President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in France.
The Pakistani Prime Minister is extremely frustrated over the recent curfew Modi's Hindu nationalist government imposed on Kashmir. For 50 days now, the Muslim people there have been on lockdown by a force of 900,000 soldiers. The U.S. president didn't make things better when he met with Modi to talk about peace between the two countries. Unconfirmed reports are saying Trump agreed with Modi that if he says he controls Kashmir, then he does.
Well, Khan had recently met with President Trump in Washington to discuss Kashmir, so the Pakistani leader was expecting the U.S. president to deliver some harsh words to Modi. That did not take place. So now Prime Minister Khan is worried when Kashmir's curfew is lifted, the Indian government will carry out a mass genocide of Muslims there.
So Khan's resorting to threats of a nuclear strike on India if Modi does not let Kashmir loose. And he's not just threatening India, Jeff, he's warning the global community that if a nuclear war takes place between India and Pakistan, the entire world will suffer repercussions from it. And that, of course, is what we're seeing with a lot of these nations who do have the nuclear bombs or weapons, that they're becoming more emboldened to use them, where before it was the worry of, well, we don't really want to use this and draw another country into war. They're just pretty much putting it out on the table. Look, if it comes to it, we'll use these weapons if we have to.
Right. The threats seem a lot closer now. And as you mentioned, a lot of leaders they use that. You know, that when they say all options are on the table,
Right.
well, they mean if we have to, we're going to use nuclear weapons. So you're right. It's just a matter. It's not if, but when they do decide to use nuclear weapons. And as the leader here said, that it doesn't just threaten that area where they're used. It's going to affect the entire globe. You can't, there isn't going to be a region that's untouched from the use of nuclear weapons. So, you know, serious devastation. I mean, you know, some of those, they have said millions, you know, killed in the dropping of those bombs, and then many more millions dying immediately afterwards.
And some of these countries, for instance, Iran, they're only going to be pushed for so much. You know, they're only going to be able to take so much before they feel the need to defend themselves. And even the foreign minister has said many times, and like we brought out in this broadcast, you know, it's a increase in assertiveness of his warnings to the United States. You know, they have nothing to gain from firing a missile at Saudi Arabia, but if the U.S. uses this as a means to attack their country, then we'll do what we need to do to defend ourselves. So we're seeing all the nations in this conflict in and around that great river Euphrates push closer and closer to war every single day.
Yeah, and that's all a very interesting point you made there. It's all in that quarter part of the earth that Yisrayl Hawkins continues to mention there. You know, that is where these wars are going to start, and they have been taking place this whole time, as Bible prophecy shows. So interesting correlation there. So if you'd like to learn more about these stories, you can contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. To contact the House of Yahweh, here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as mentioned before, don't forget the Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael programs, which are available free online for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to aid you in your study and understanding of the Holy Scriptures and the prophecies that pertain to this time period. You can find those by typing in YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is a very special message from Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.
If everybody please stand, I want to show you an article really quickly. And if you see this article, you see the mushroom cloud here. And it says that world sleepwalking into total nuclear war as callous elite fear no bloodshed. And it says by limiting nuclear arsenals, that doesn't make the world safer. Not while the elites who have never seen a big war complacently believe they never will. Remember, Pastor's been telling them to wake up. It's coming. Wake up. And at this time, remember, man does not live by bread alone, but by the every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. And at this time, I would like to introduce the mouth of Yahweh in these last days, the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
There we go. Gotta have this. Look at what a wonderful crowd, Yahweh. Hey, Yahweh. Be seated, please. Everything is looking really great. Putin says the world is sleepwalking, walking right into it and don't realize it. And of course, that includes the 4,199 religions. religion against religion, religion against nation against nation. This word gematria, I was trying to figure out how we would change that. If you study it any, you might mark off that word GE and put the word YAH in front of that. This was gematria, of course, is written in Hebrew, but they translated it to the Greek, and the Greek is what we're getting, and it kind of throws things off. But anyway, if you're getting deep into it, that would be one way to solve the problem you're having. The world is getting ready for war. Of course, the whole world. We're getting ready for a feast. Praise Yahweh. The seal is being put out more these days than any other time. Yahweh's peace be with each and every one of you, by the way. This was a couple of weeks ago, if you can see that number, and almost 250,000. Then it went up a little on that one. The 207 to 226. Is everybody sitting down now? Over 250,000. Yeah, almost a half, in fact. The seal is going out to them. Let me see if I want anything else there. No, I don't think so. The space we're covering is the entire earth. I want to show you this. Now, India was mentioned there in the news today, but if you recognize it on the map on the left there. Now, also, you see I got something circled right here? That's an island that you can't even see, and yet we're reaching it. I don't know how they get their television signals, but somehow or another they're getting the television signals. And when we went to look that up, it was so amazing that you can't see it. And then we put a red dot over it. It made it worse. We couldn't see it at all then. So I said, well, I'll just circle it and tell you, there's an island there. It's so tiny that you can't see it, but I got a circle for you, and that red dot in the middle covers it up. So that should tell you, that should tell you a lot right there. If you, no, I better not mention this. Where the Catholic Church was given, and in the beginning. But you got to get ready for that one before I do. The world, the oil now. U.S. to deploy military forces to Saudi Arabia. UAE after drone attacks on oil sites. Everything is about oil today. If you notice on the news, it's hurt not the oil. If you be turning over to Matthew 24, but now the feast. This is going to be the best feast ever. And the way, and I keep telling the elders that, because the more trouble you have, the greater the feast. The thing to do is to get you to stand strong. The troubles you're having, right now, it's the way you handle them. It's to get you strengthened, and I would you could remember everything I've brought about the court in heaven. Yeshua, our high priest, he's your defender. Now, he can't, and he tells you he won't. If you disobey, if you're unruly, if you go against your husband, if you go against me, I'm the assigned one to tell you Yahweh's will. It's down to the point that if you do this, it's a deliberate sin. And in Hebrews 10, about 23 tells you that you won't be forgiven. Yeshua said, I'll tell you, get away from me, you who practice iniquity. Deliberate sins. Deliberate sins. If you do what I asked you to do, I'm just telling you to do Yahweh's will. I'm telling you to do what Yeshua tells me to do. If you rebel, you know, I want you to know that these frequencies, they're carrying the message strong and clear to every tiny island, every tiny planet throughout the universe. These rivers are heavy with them now. Yeshua is your defender in heaven. We've been granted. If you look up that word granted, you can't just look it up, though. It would take many, many sermons to cover it. It's made up of about 20 different words, but this has to do with court proceedings. I'm glad I got my experience, and when I went through that FBI school and became a police officer and got 10 years experience, it was great because it helped me to understand what is taking place in heaven right now. It's granted. Well, of course, Yahweh put it in the scriptures long before that we read it, thousands of years before. The prophecies, they come to pass as Yahweh wills. When I wrote the book in 1976, I spoke of the 7-year peace plan. I wrote about the 7-year peace plan. That 7-year peace plan that I wrote about in 76 did not come to pass until 1993. But I knew it would come to pass. 1993, 76, 86, 93. You got several years there that we waited and we waited. I had a man sitting in the sound room here, right here. I said, don't miss a word of the news. If you got to go somewhere, get someone to take your place, but don't miss a word of this news because this is coming. And it'll be here, be here soon. Well, those years passed, and finally it came. And we caught it. And of course, we were the only ones that even knew what we knew about it and what it actually meant. And then I said it's going to be shut down at a certain time. So Shaul and I were in Israel working with the leaders there at the time that Netanyahu stopped the peace plan. But we were watching there to see the world news, to see what was taking place that evening. And we had no idea this was going to take place, but we were prepared for it. and it did take place. And he shut it down, just like the prophecy said it would. But you see how many years that's been? And people thought, well, it'll start back up yesterday or today. Well, 21 years later, it started back up. 21 years. Yes. And that's what we were looking for again, was the start of that. Yahweh writes these prophecies, and then he's the one that put this together. No one else could do this. Here a little and there a little. And then he gave it this gematria, which gives you numbers. I was so excited this week, and Yahuda was too, because we got that Bible, that Israel Bible, that came out, and David's already broke his hip 3 times this week. But instead of the name Yahweh, they took it out, and each place they took it out of that translation, that Bible. They put the Hebrew word Hashim, which means the name. So you can go through that Bible and you can see each place that where we have the word Yahweh, they have the word Hashim. So it backs us up. But that's not the only thing it backs us up in. It also backs us up in the hidden codes again. And I wanted that too. And of course, that's where David is getting his joy right now. and getting ready for the feast. I don't think we have time to bring it before the feast, but anyway, we'll be bringing you bits and pieces of it. If you're thinking about getting one, I can tell you it's boring to people who are inexperienced in gematria or inexperienced in the scriptures. If you are experienced in the scriptures and gematria and you know how to work these things, then it's very exciting. But you really don't need it. What you need desperately is to study the Book of Yisrayl, books of Yisrayl, and the Book of Yahweh. If you spend your time there, you won't. You couldn't possibly cover it till Yeshua comes, but you'll set an example for yourself. When we were granted to come before this throne, it's like going to court. They're having court in heaven, and everything is being pointed out by Yeshua to this court of all the beings in the universe. They can see it, and what is being pointed out is Yahweh's prophecies being fulfilled, just like I'm pointing out right in here on earth, that Yahweh's prophecies are being fulfilled in the set time, as Daniel said. It'll be for a set time. And, of course, we can see the prophecy. We know it's coming, like we knew the nuclear bomb was going to be built. We knew that the nuclear bomb was built. William Peary, I don't know how many remember him, but he was very active in Clinton's day. And the nuclear bombs were developed in my lifetime. They were started in 1934, but they were a long time in coming. And when they finally dropped the first one first 2 on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this let them know how strong this nuclear power was. It let me know how strong it was, the nuclear power that was shown to me in prophecy, in Revelations, where it said they make fire come down from heaven. Well, of course, that's it. If I could have that picture you had, that's a nuclear explosion. And William Peary, but you see that's a nuclear explosion. And of course, he was really a scientific genius, and he work with taking the bomb from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that power we had right there, to what we have today. And now the man is repenting. I said repenting, probably not repenting, but he's really being troubled about what he helped do, bring about, he says, and he describes it in his book, he describes it as being just exactly what it is today. If a very small exchange of nuclear war was to take place, when it takes place, and he knows it's going to. Now, he knows that now. He didn't then, but he realizes now, as this article shows, and as you saw in the other news, he realizes that what he did in bringing forth this bomb from Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day to Iran Day, where the oil is involved, and he said, one article said, if a very small exchange between the United States and Russia was to take place right now, you would see about 18 million people per hour start dying. 18 million per hour. Now that's a small exchange of the powerful bombs that he helped bring forth to this time period. They're much stronger than what they were then, but that one, those two, destroyed those two cities. It's still impossible to live in that land that where those cities stood because of the poisoning of the radiation. So you see what we're up against when we will do this. Yahweh says, my sons, any place you see that word, as I was explaining to the elder this morning, any place you see that word, sons, it doesn't rule out anything. In fact, it means daughters, and the same word is translated later as sons and my daughters. They will rule that city, as you saw brought out in the name of it, which was brought out this morning. That's not nearly all of it. And in fact, I don't think we'll get it covered within a year, but we'll be bringing bits and pieces of that too, along with the other sermons. But the strength of those bombs now that bring down the fire from heaven now is the one that Revelation 18 speaks of. A person. I said, you can't believe the Scriptures unless you study the Scriptures. You can't study the Scriptures on your own. That's shown to you in Acts, where Philip taught the man, Yeshua, which we'll get into. It's the prophecies of Yeshua. They're vague if you read one in Isaiah and you don't read the rest of them throughout the Holy Scriptures, and then you reject the Book 2. If you reject Book 2, you reject the whole thing. This is where our buddies, the Hebrews, Yada has got thrown off. It was never meant to be complete until our time. In the last days I will establish my house. The last days is not the days of Moshe. The last days is not the days when Yeshua came and they killed him, hung him on a stake and killed him. All of his blood out of his body, by the way. They drained all the blood out of his body. Remember, no blood? If you've worked on that any, I hope you have. But you see, the study, you can't get too much study. I would study 24 hours a day if my body would allow me to. And I tried to at one time. When I got past 16, my brain started straightening out. Yahweh started straightening my brain out. And I went into my 17th year, wanting to write a commentary on the Holy Scriptures. Until that time, I was a little bit of a fool, a great idiot from time to time, and I could have got more learning in if I would have set my mind to it and not been influenced. Talking about influence. Yes, I have to jump from one to another. You're talking about influence. There's nothing worse than putting the world with your children. Hagar. You know the reason that Sarah wanted Hagar to go? Her son was a bad influence. If he'd have been allowed to, there would have probably been killings from it. Isaac would have learned war. Do you know why that they didn't let the Egyptian priestess raise Moshe? Did you see the trouble that Yahweh went to there to keep the influence away from Moshe? He was trained by his own mother, who had Abraham's teaching in her from the time she was born, if you want to go back and look. From the time she was born, she was taught Yahweh's way. And of course she had Moshe, and she taught that boy to where he knew what his job was before he left there. As far as anyone knew, he was an Egyptian prince, born to the queen. That's all anyone knew. Well, how come they didn't know he wasn't Hebrew? If you just look where they came from, those 12 people, they all came from Noah just a few years before that. They settled, and this is the big lie that brought this deception. Egypt was where it all started. And Yahweh set the Catholic Church there, that he allowed Satan to set the Catholic Church in that garden. And he set Adam and Eve there, and Abel. Of course, they killed Abel. So they rejected Yahweh's way, his laws, statutes, and judgment. The next prophecy you'll see where that comes back is, of course, Isaiah. Then you go to Micaiah, which is shown also, almost identical. In the last days, I will establish my house. Well, what about all these other houses between here and there? No. No. In the last days, I will establish my house. And then he tells you why. How would you ever know this? The prophecies show a Savior had to come and die. He had to go to heaven, where he works from the right hand of Yahweh in the court system, in this court system of which our frequencies are going right now. And he's using those frequencies to testify for you among among all the universe. Those are going out to all the universe. Now, surely, I know we hadn't brought very much on this frequencies and linen, but surely you've gotten enough from that to know that these are like rivers of water, but they're rivers of information that is going. Now, Yeshua, he's had 2,000 years of practice. His subconscious mind that he had, that he was born with here, he has the use of it. It's been drinking in information for 2,000 years. Now, that's our representative in heaven, in the court, in the court that involves all the courts there. This is the same court that said to Satan, you have no place in heaven anymore. Well, Satan's next move, of course, I brought this out many, many times, but I don't want to have to cover it here, but Yeshua is what I want to cover. Yeshua, he had to die. That's what the prophecies said he would do. He had to come and be taken as a lamb to the slaughter. He had to, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. If you read that of Jonah, or Yonah, you'll know that was Yeshua in the grave. That represented what the Savior was going to take place with him. He was going to be killed, and he says, as Jonah was in the grave, in a fish's belly, 3 days and 3 nights. If you put that together now, 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, and you see what Christianity is doing today with this Good Friday. They call it God Friday. Well, that's what it is, because it's bringing forth the knowledge, this great knowledge of evil, which is a deceiving knowledge that was promised the whole world in Genesis. This knowledge that they drink in. They drink in this knowledge of evil. And Yahweh told Adam, he said, don't go near that, or you're going to get confused. Confusion will set in. You'll have continuous war. And that's what they've had. They went into it. They rejected Yahweh's way. So Yahweh said, you've thrown this away. Now I won't give it again. I won't give it again until there's a high priest over this house of Yahweh, representing my plan. This is Yahweh's plan now. There's got to be a high priest over it, and he's got to be representing this plan to the heavenly court. Now, what we're shown all of this, and we're shown what he teaches and his decisions that he makes for mankind, for House of Yahweh. Well, it was cut off, and then Yeshua was prophesied to be next in Yahweh's plan. Now, the bloodline of Abraham, this is a 6,000-year plan, remember that. The bloodline of Abraham came all the way down to 4,000 years. The Savior was born. They killed him. He went to heaven. There's witnesses of this. Many witnesses of his death. It changed the numbering system. It changed the world. His death. He came and he was murdered. He rose after 3 days and 3 nights, he rose. He's put in the grave on the evening. Now, you know, any child could figure that up. Any child can figure that up. The Christians are bringing forth a lie there. And of course, this cuts them off from understanding, because they have to reject Yahshua and they have to accept this God worship that says, that changed his name too. I'm glad, because they shouldn't even have it in their mouth. But they're cut off from Yahshua. Only his house is active with Yahshua at this time. And Yahshua is representing us through these frequencies now. It's granted, this is granted by the court in heaven. The same one that says you have no place here anymore, Satan. There's no place for you in heaven anymore. So we're going to limit you to earth for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, then you will die and you'll go back to where you came from. Well, this court trial now that's going on right now, we've been granted to wear this white linen. Bright linen. As you saw, the word means bright. It means also wise. You see it in Daniel 8, Daniel the 8th chapter. Those who are wise, that's the same word, will shine bright like the stars of heaven in brightness. That is, you're going to stand out. Well, of course, the heavens know what you're going to do, because Yahweh, they know his plan now, because Yahshua has been presenting it to them for a number of years. He had to train for 2,000 years to represent us. Now the time is here. Here's my house. In the last days I will establish my house. Now, that was written 700 years before Yahshua. It was actually written before that, because it goes back to Genesis. 4,000 years before that, it was when it was first brought out. And then Yeshua goes to heaven and he practices and learns. He's gulping in the knowledge from his subconscious mind. He's also taken in your records, because your records now are flowing to him. Everyone here, you're not hidden anymore. It's been granted that you wear this linen. You. So all, praise Yahweh. So all the heavenly court now is well aware of each one of you. That's the reason it's so vitally important that you be a perfect example of righteousness. Now think about that when you go out and you have problems to solve. Stand up for Yahweh if the whole world stands against you. You stand up for Yahweh. You can't make up your own mind. How would you understand? I just got through giving you a puzzle, a conglomeration that you have to go through to get to this wisdom. First off, you have to be called. Many are called and few are chosen. So that means not many are going to grasp this or put the initiative behind it. Change your inabilities to ability and get to taking this in. First off, you've got to go to the place. That's the first thing you do to get this. There you've got to do what the priest says. There you've got to remember to keep holy the seventh day. And then in Hebrews 10:21, now Yeshua is your high priest. He's the one representing you now. And he's still telling us, don't forget to gather yourselves together. Don't forsake the gathering of yourself together. For if we sin, this is talking about the Sabbath day, if we sin willfully, if you go to where you can't keep the Sabbath, you're sinning willfully. You can't keep it by yourself. I just told you, don't forsake the gathering of yourself together. If you've got it to where you can, hang on to it. Don't leave it. Now, if you leave it, Yeshua says, if you leave it, if you don't gather, if you stop the gathering, he says there's no more sacrifice. He was the one that was sacrificed for you. The same one that's representing you now in heaven, he's the one that was killed for you to pay for your past sin. But if you do it deliberately, he says, there's no more sacrifice for sin. Well, of course, we're getting ready for this feast. It's granted that we should wear this. We should wear this linen, which takes you in direct contact with Yeshua. And of course, he takes you in direct contact with the heavenly court. This court is going to accept you. The universe is waiting. Many, as one of the apostles said, they're waiting to see who you are, the ones that Yahweh chooses. Well, you're his chosen, brothers and sisters. You're his chosen, the sons and daughters of Yahweh. Each child you have can be with you. Each of my sons has the opportunity. My sons are all the men and sitting in the sanctuary, and those hearing me out there being sealed. That's my sons. That's the sons of, that's right. Each one of you are my daughters. Everyone sitting here and those listening and being sealed out there right now with this seal of Yahweh, which is total unity, as Yeshua showed in Matthew 16:18. Total unity. That's the way he's going to build his house. Nothing except total obedience. In Matthew 24:7, we see that the nations and religions are getting ready for this war. Revelations 18 shows it's going to be a 1-hour burning that you're going to be cast into if you're not in the house. If you're not keeping these feasts, which tells you, hey, this is going to take place on a feast. This is going to take place on a feast. Because Psalms 91, remember that psalm? This is a protected place. And he shows that Psalms 91, that you're going to be covered there. Well, in Colossians, he says, don't let anyone, oh boy, now here comes Satan. Remember, as she beguiled Eve, that was Cain doing the beguiling. And Cain was saying, but mother, it's better this way. Look at all the fun you're missing out on. They didn't have cars back then. They didn't have a lot of stuff then that we do now. So the strong, the pull First off, you get the inspiration. Maybe it's called car fever. I remember that one well. Car fever. That's when your mind is off of the scriptures now. Let me tell you another one that goes with this. Maybe this will help you to understand this. Cigarette smoking. See, that's my generation also. Now, the cigarette smoking they had a lot of leisure time. People had a lot of leisure time. Farm life was easy. When the crops were laid by, you had a lot of time. They started having parties. Well, of course, we weren't included in those parties. Sometimes we were, but not very often. But the man had a lot of time on his hands, and here come this tobacco generation, the smoking cigarettes generation. And you could, since you didn't have a television set to watch, and they weren't reading the scriptures like my family was. My family was sitting around of the evening, leisure time, reading the scriptures, studying the scriptures. But most of the families weren't. And, of course, they got bored. Now, the cigarette smoking is something that gave them pleasure, and they forgot about being bored. They're sitting there, leaned back, smoking their cigarettes, which gave them this euphoria feeling, the all is well, enjoy life. It didn't include the filling of the lungs with their advertisements. I remember when John Wayne, he's one of the white. He had a white hat. Yes, racism was taught back then too. I didn't learn it. For some reason, I didn't learn it. But the white hat, that was John Wayne. Gene Autry and Roy Rogers, all of those wore the white hats. The black hats, they were the evil one. And John Wayne, he was one of the popular ones with the white hat, and he said, I won't be satisfied until I have the whole world smoking Camel cigarettes. And of course, he died of cancer. And he took back his word, like William Perry. He's sorry now that he helped develop the nuclear bomb, because he knows what's going to take place with it now. He knows there's no escaping this war. And that's what he's put out. He says, there's some things you could do, but it won't be done. And he knows that it's coming. The one that helped develop it, he's about my age, just about my age, and he's spent his life on getting the world ready for this nuclear war. I've spent my life, or the biggest part of it, getting you ready for this test right now. You are being tested. This is spoken of because Joshua tells you how strong this is going to get right here. This is just the start of it. And everything that takes place in your life, you better be thinking of two pulls. Not just the cigarette smoking, that just shows you how that can come in to take the place of reading your scriptures. And the man who sat around smoking a cigarette, he wasn't involved in reading the scripture. And so it was a time of pleasure for him where he just sat back and enjoyed the smoke going into his lungs and coming back out. Well, now you have all kinds of entertainment. Visitation, which I strongly condemn. Visitation. If you want to visit, visit with an elder or a kohana, one who will teach you or help you to find a class and say, let's go get in this class. You know, we got classes, I think, every night, don't we? If we got one missing, let me know and I'll put one in it. But all kinds of ways now, Satan has to pull you out. Just kinfolks, I cut myself off from my kinfolks. They come to the gate wanting to see me. I say, come to the feast. Tell him to come to the feast and he'll see you. Well, is he still alive? Is he still alive? He's outlived all the Hawkins family. Well, come here and run me a race and we'll see. But anyway, I cut them off. I cut myself off from the world, and I don't go to town. No, I quit that years ago. They tried to pay me to go to town. Said I couldn't have this $5,000 that they owed me, and I said, well, let them spend it there, but you're not going to get me in town any longer. Well, they finally found a way. They paid me my money. I gave it to the shoppers. I told them, wash this stuff thoroughly. Yeah. And they did. They take great precaution with what they do. They do it well. The pulls that we have in today's world are tremendous. Much more than when they beguiled Eve. They have it today. This car fever, that's one. You know, I don't know, maybe you're into vapors out there. I know no one here would be that foolish. But now maybe that it's killing people, maybe they'll wise up to the fact that the reason I don't smoke. Get near me. You can't smell cigarettes. You can quit or start anything you want to. You can remember or not remember anything that you don't want to remember. I remember two parents that raised me, and I remember the way they tried to guide me away from influence and evil. I remember what an impact it had on me. Now, I went my own way, and Yahweh brought me back. But we're out of time. Now, let me tell you something. There's a difference in my life and yours. You don't have time for it. This is it. We're in the last 3.5 years. If you forsake it, it's gone. Yeshua is your high priest. And he plainly tells you in the 10th chapter of Hebrews, if you forsake it, there's going to be no more sacrifice for you. You had it, you threw it away like Eve. Be careful lest the Satan who beguiled Eve, y'all look up that word and see what a mess you can make at that age. You can ruin your whole life at that age. One incident can ruin your whole life, and you can't get it back. You can't get it back. There's no returning it. Once the incident takes place, it's done. It's like taking a life. There ain't no way you could put it back. Be thinking on it. Think on it hard, because everything, every action, every thought in your heart as well as your mind is going before this heavenly court. And they're going to say, what would they do right now? They look on you with disgust and say, surely you're not going to let that in here to run our lives. Your people will have proved themselves. You should praise Yahweh. You should look that up and write or make a sermon out on it. Your people will have proved themselves before. There's no proving yourself afterwards. Be sure and get that before. You can't find it in Strong's. That's amazing, isn't it? Now I tell you to look it up. You need help, right? Well, look for it. See if you can write an article on that verse. I was about to say it. It's a hard habit to break. Yahweh bless your understanding. I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you.